Is there an innocent explanation for someone to seek preemptive pardons for family members? Would you do that if you knew you were innocent and just worried about outside forces?
The answer to that is going to be no.
After the first 2 full days of Donald Trump being back in the Oval Office, there's already so much controversy to talk about. In this video today, Democrats and the mainstream news media lose their minds over President Trump's pardoning of 1,500 of the January 6th prisoners, without even mentioning the pardons that Joe Biden made on his way out of office that morning. You'll see the new narrative they're trying to push. Donald Trump kept his promise. He told us on the campaign trail that this was something he was going to do. He did it on day one. Let's see the moment.
So this is January 6th. These are the hostages. Approximately 1,500 for a pardon.
Yes.
Full pardon.
Full pardon or commutations?
Full pardon. We have about 6 commutations in there where we're doing further research.
Okay.
Nice to see you again. So this is a big one. Anything you want to explain about this? We hope they get them. We hope they come out tonight, frankly. They're expecting it.
Of course, Democrats believe that they have the moral high ground here, which is why they're so outraged. They don't believe the justice system over-prosecuted a lot of these individuals for just standing in a crowd without even stepping foot inside the Capitol building. Let's take a look at this exchange between Scott Jennings and Van Jones on CNN.
Here's what I think. Were these people punished? Yes. Were they ruined financially? Yes. Did they spend time in jail? Yes. Have their lives been ruined? Absolutely. And one of you said earlier, Van or Axe, that you think this sends a terrible signal that you can get away with things like this, as though we've never had a moment in recent American history when people were not punished for rampaging around when they shouldn't have been. It was the summer of 2020. And these people were actually punished. Those people were never even charged.
That's not true at all.
That's not true. Most charges were not.
Let him answer. But I do see it differently in that I don't like it when people tear up buildings at all. I'm not a part of some pro-riot, pro-crime lobby. But I really don't like when people attack police officers. I really don't like it at all. I'm the son of a police officer. My uncle's a police officer. I don't like it at all. If you attack a police officer, before you get any lenience or before you get any support from this society, you should apologize. And they didn't. And that's wrong. And you yourself and others said you would have a problem if the violent ones were let go.
I concede it. I agree.
And that's my problem tonight.
I agree. I don't like the idea specifically the people that attack police. I'm in agreement with you on that. But I do think it is important to note that these people, whatever they did, whether it was just accidentally walking in or doing something much, much worse, Elliot, you can correct me if I'm wrong, most of them, if not all of them, did get punished, serve some kind of time. And my assumption is virtually all of them have had their lives effectively ruined by this. I thought there were hundreds of...
Without getting into any of the semantics of this, obviously people are recommending to Trump to look into specific cases where police officers were attacked a little bit more closely. But I think it's important to point out the double standard that many of the reporters on CNN and other networks have had. Where was the outrage when we saw a police precinct in Minneapolis burning down? Remember the mostly peaceful protest?
I want to be clear in how I characterize this. This is mostly a protest. It is not, generally speaking, unruly.
What you're seeing behind me is one of multiple locations that have been burning in Kenosha, Wisconsin over the course of...
3rd Precinct here. There are fires burning to the left of it at the wine and liquor store on your left, but back in the back of the precinct, you're hearing people throwing things against the walls, against the glass, against anything they can.
This is just another example of a two-tiered justice system. And you'll see the hypocrisy on display again when Scott Jennings joins another panel with Abby Phillips on CNN. Take a look at this.
I would always also expect to see, the hundreds of people who were convicted of the George Floyd protests of assaulting police officers to walk free, right, Scott?
Well, they were prosecuted.
How many were prosecuted ultimately?
Hundreds.
Because there were lots of people that had all their charges dropped.
I have the answer for you, and it's hundreds of them.
Yeah, I saw an analysis. I saw an analysis that summer, and most people who were charged had their charges dropped.
But what charges were they?
All kinds of charges.
If they were failure to disperse, those types of charges. The ones who were charged with violent crimes, those charges were not dismissed. They were prosecuted.
Well, they went into all kinds of diversionary programs. I'm one of the few lawyers in this country that represented people in those riots and on January 6th, one of the very few. And the way that the prosecution was handled between those two groups are starkly different.
Don't you think that there is a substantive difference between what happened on January 6th, what they were trying to do, and why the federal government has a desire and, in fact, a necessity to prevent that from ever happening again? Don't you think there's a substantive difference between those two things? One of them was trying to overturn an election.
I'll answer.
You don't think there's a difference between trying to overturn an election and violent social justice protests?
Call it social justice. Okay.
I'll give it to you, Scott. Let's say that they're violent. You don't think there's a difference between trying to obstruct the peaceful transfer of power
here's what I think.
And violent riots in the street of any kind? The ones in 1968, the ones
what were the objective of those riots?
I think both groups of people were mad about something going on. They wanted to change it. They took matters into their own hands that they should not have done. In both cases, you had people engaging in activities that they should not have engaged in. Now, our culture and our public discourse decided one group of people, social justice is good, and these people were bad. But the reality is they had the same motivation.
Here's the thing. They
all did the same thing.
Wait a second.
They have the same motivation.
They did not have the same
motivation. They wanted to
motivation,
change
Scott.
something they didn't like.
I think it's important to highlight the contrast here. There was a very clear difference between, let's put it in simple terms, the treatment of a group of people on one side that were mad about an injustice of a man being shot by a police officer, and on the other side, a group of people being mad about an election they believed to be rigged. Whether that be true or not, that's what they believed. It really shouldn't matter what their cause is, only for the fact that they should be treated equally under the eyes of the law for any criminal acts. Abby Phillips here is arguing that because of the difference in their cause, justice should be applied differently also. That's the exact problem here, and this is exactly why millions of Americans voted for Trump into office this time. He was the only one that promised the American people that there would be just one tier of justice for all. So that's one contrast we can make. Now let's make another one. On the morning of Donald Trump's inauguration, Joe Biden pardoned members of the January 6th investigation committee, along with other figureheads, including General Milley and Dr. Fauci. And then further to that, right before Biden stepped outside of the White House for the last time, during the actual moment President Trump was making his speech, Joe Biden pardoned several of his own family members after telling the American people he wouldn't do that. This is clearly not the same thing as Trump pardoning the January 6th prisoners who have served jail time. They have lost money. Their lives have been ruined. There's a big difference between these two pardons that were made by Joe Biden and Trump in comparison. The mainstream news media is still there to make sure they can push the narrative that they want and try to justify good reasons for Biden doing this. Let's hear Scott Jennings once again giving his opinion on the difference between the two.
I think he's been plotting to do this for months and months and months, just like he was plotting to pardon Hunter Biden for months while lying to the American people about it. And this is the problem. If you want to be outraged about Donald Trump's January 6th pardons, it's just hard for me to muster the same kind of...
But you did call them...
Scott,
you did call them domestic terrorists.
Yes, look, I want to answer David because he addressed me about this earlier. I don't feel any differently about January 6th today as I felt on the day when you and I sat here about it. I don't feel any differently about it at all. It was a terrible day. It should not have happened. People should not have committed violent acts. And it was a stain on the end of Donald Trump's first term. However, I have taken in that event, his term, Biden's term, and then the American people took it all in, and they just rendered the ultimate adjudication for it. And the difference between the preemptive pardons and these pardons is the January 6th people, whether you like it or not, most of them did face severe punishment. Some have already been in jail and already out of jail. Yes, they got a pardon, but that doesn't mean they didn't face consequences for their actions. My problem with Biden is none of these preemptive pardons people are going to face any consequences. And
for what?
Most
for
of
what,
them,
Scott? What are they?
I don't know.
What crime did they rampage through the Capitol?
What
did they?
Tax evasion.
No, I'm not talking about Hunter Biden.
You tell me. Why did they need it then? Why did they need it?
I just think it's funny how the Democrats are trying to justify the pardons that Joe Biden has given and why it's such a good thing, which it's clearly not. It's because if Trump truly investigates these individuals, he will find something that they can be prosecuted for. If you really believe they were innocent, you wouldn't have to issue the pardon. It just heightens the belief that they are guilty of something. Don't take my word for it. Listen to this guy.
If the president does indeed pardon, let's say, Rudy Giuliani or any members of his family, would you see that, and I asked Preet Bharara this question, as essentially an admission of guilt?
I certainly would view it that way. I think millions of Americans would view it that way. If there was no belief in criminality, why would he think a pardon was necessary? But nonetheless, you can see the president trying to lay the foundation for that kind of a inherently self-dealing and I think corrupt act by suggesting that, vengeful Biden administration bureaucrats might go after him. So you see him laying the foundation. And this is a president who, on the way into office, acted corruptly and I think is determined on the way out to do the same.
Oh, right. So then you would be guilty of something if you received a preemptive pardon. Adam, you've just received one from President Biden because you were on the January 6th committee. What are you guilty of? In my previous video, actually, I had jokingly alluded to this scenario just through my reaction to him questioning Pam Bondi. If you haven't seen that yet, you should check it out. Point is, I made that video before we knew that Joe Biden had issued these pardons. The question I have, are these preemptive pardons legal? Will they stick? I wonder what Adam thinks.
The question is, will it be null and void? And I think the answer is yes. He can say, I hereby pardon myself. But if he is brought up on federal charges, and that's how that would be tested, it would ultimately be decided by the Supreme Court. Are you allowed to be the judge of your own case? Is the president effectively above the law? And I think any court should resolve that and would resolve that by saying no. The pardon power does not allow a president to self-pardon because to do so would make the Constitution a suicide pact. It would effectively undermine so many other provisions of the Constitution, including the one that requires the president to faithfully execute the laws. But it hasn't been tried before because we haven't had a president corrupt enough to try it before.
The bad news is that we did have a president that was corrupt enough to have actually done it and issued a preemptive pardon. Let's just get a second opinion on that.
And Counselor, you get the last word, and it's a serious question. Is there an innocent explanation for someone to seek preemptive pardons for family members? Would you do that if you knew you were innocent and just worried about outside forces?
The answer to that is going to be no. And if you haven't done anything wrong, you sit there and go, what do you need a preemptive pardon for?
This is exactly my point. If you haven't done anything wrong, what do you need a preemptive pardon for? Now, both of these clips, including the previous one with Adam Schiff, were from 4 years ago, right before the end of the first Trump administration, before January 6th. What I'm really surprised about is that Jake Tapper, just 2 days ago, said this. Watch this final clip.
For career officials at the Justice Department, this is a really crappy day because it starts with these sweeping pardons that President Biden, former President Biden now, is giving to his immediate family. Preemptive pardons for his brothers Frank and Jimmy, to his sister Valerie, and then to, I think, a couple in-laws.
Their spouses, yeah.
And that, to a lot of people, this did not go through the regular pardon attorney, the pardon process. And Biden in 2020, when I interviewed him right after he'd been elected, had some very harsh things to say about the idea of Trump giving preemptive pardons to his family members. He said it would set a horrible precedent. Now, Trump didn't do it. Joe Biden did. And we can come back to that subject later in the day.
It looks like Jake is really struggling to get the words out. I'm sure he's very reluctant to report this story. Let's bring this back full circle to make our final point here. If I were to think like a Democrat did 4 years ago, I think we can confidently say that the people on the January 6th committee that have been issued pardons are definitely guilty of something. I think we'd all like to know if the narrative of the committee destroying evidence that would exonerate Trump is true. There's so much we really don't know about that day, and probably never will. Of course, we can acknowledge that the whole sequence of events was shameful. It was an embarrassment for the country, and violence against any police officer will never be tolerated in any shape or form. But for years now, we've been hearing from the far left that Trump instigated this insurrection and was 100% responsible. I think more and more people now are beginning to believe that quite simply isn't true. How much did Nancy Pelosi know about these security threats before? Were there really 36 FBI informants in the crowd agitating them and leading them to raid the Capitol building? Most of the cases where people were arrested and put in jail were probably over-prosecuted. Trump issued the pardon just like he promised, and obviously the country is just ready to move on from this. Anybody questioning why these 1,500 pardons were issued should first look towards Joe Biden and ask why he felt the need to pre-pardon members of his own family. Most people would find the answer to that question more troublesome. Now, I would like to ask you to do one final favor. Please, if you got value from this video, please hit the subscribe button and make a comment in the section below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you think about the pardons that both Trump and Joe Biden have issued. What do you think about the treatment of the January 6th prisoners in contrast to the riots that we saw in Minneapolis 4 years ago? And finally, as I have done in the previous videos, I've included a link to the Red Cross. I'm really strongly supporting all the victims of the wildfires that we've seen out in California. And if you can help in any way, please follow that link. I'll see you in the next video.